World of Warcraft is all about the numbers. With Sims, you can assign a number to just how pissed off you should be that you still haven't got a necklace from Mythic Plus. What's up, gamers? And now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, why is this freak making me look at his naked dwarf dancing on the mailbox? I promise, it'll make sense in a moment. So let's assume you're looking for information on simming. That's probably because if you're like me, your bags are full of infinite shit and you don't know what's safe to get rid of. Well, Sims can tell you that. Or maybe your parses look like this, and you're wondering, how is it that I optimize my character to start doing actual damage? Or maybe you went into a class Discord, you had a really thoughtful question, and without reading it, some bozo replied sim it yourself within 5 seconds. I'll show you how to do that too. But why is my dwarf naked? Well, if you don't know anything about simming, it's a safe bet to assume you don't know anything about what gear to equip. So using everything in my shitty bags right here, I'm going to assemble a clown suit based off of the first item that gets equipped out of the alt menu. And we're going to take this absolute clown suit and we're going to turn it into a gear set that is optimized for us to do the most damage possible. And you'll see we're just getting some absolutely clown items here. So is there any chance that this is actually good for my character? No. Don't worry. We'll fix it. Let me show you how. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is use the simulationcraft add-on to create an export of our character information. We're going to type /simc into the chat window, and we're going to get this little transparent pop-up. What this is basically something that's going to tell the simulation everything about your character. It's going to tell you what talents you're running, what items you have in your bags, how much crests you have. Literally anything you might ever need to know about your character is in this little thing. So we're going to copy this, and then we're going to go to our new best friend website, raidbots.com. Alright, so this is the main page of Raidbots, and basically what this website is a shell that's going to run the simulationcraft program for us. Anything that you could do on Raidbots, you could also do on the simulationcraft program, but it would take way longer, be much more unwieldy, and you'd have way less fun doing it. So be prepared to get familiar with Raidbots. Now, of these 4 categories that are going to be really in our face as we start, the place we're going to actually want to start is going to be the third one, Quick Sim. Now, the point of this is basically just sim your character. We want to know where we're at before we start trying to optimize anything. This load from SimC add-on section, you can kind of imagine, that's where we're going to be pasting our giant text brick. And immediately here, it's already figured out, everything there is to know about our character. Everything that we're wearing. All of our talents. Our hero talents, what race we are, everything in our bags. It's all here. So, now that the sim knows who we are, it now needs to know what we're doing. So the simulation options section is probably the most complex thing that you're going to have to work with at any point. The first and most important option is going to be the fight style. Now, there's a bunch of these, and depending on your class, there's sort of a variable level of usefulness. You can see something like heavy movement. It will simulate moving 25 yards every 10 seconds, whereas something like patchwork just sims you doing damage. I would say 90% of your sims should be run on patchwork, because even something like Dungeon Slice, which is meant to try to emulate a Mythic Plus dungeon, is just going to be completely unrepresentative of reality, because things like the time out of combat, the way your tank pulls, are all going to be completely random and not something that the sim could account for in any way. So, if you wanted to sim for a raid boss, for example, then patchwork fight style, one boss, for 5 minutes is a great way to do so. If you wanted to know about how to sim a trash pack, for example, well, maybe you could crank the fight length down to 1:30 or even as low as 40 seconds, crank it up to 6 or 7 targets, and you've got a good trash sim there. But let's just stick to one boss, 5 minutes for now. This is the very standard sim. As for the version, just leave this on weekly, don't worry about it. Going down, you can see some things like embellishment options. I would say leave these at default unless you're experienced enough to kind of know what's going on with them. If you can look in details and see your average uptime on your dusk thread lining, then sure, you can change this. But I'd say just don't worry about it. As for consumables and raid buffs, it's very important to understand that a character that is fully buffed is miles stronger than one that is not. I mean, even if you just take a buff like Battle Shout, it is definitely not the most in-demand raid buff, but 5% attack power for something like a rogue is crazy strong. Now imagine that rogue has Mystic Touch, Battle Shout, and Wind Fury. Already, that's an insane bonus over someone who doesn't have it. So, you could absolutely try to uncheck these if you were trying to sim yourself playing solo, but realistically, unless you know exactly what raid buffs you're going to have all the time, like in a dedicated Mythic Plus group, I'd say just leave everything on and understand that your sim is going to be a little inflated if you aren't really raid buffed. Things like the potion, food, and flask settings are very safe to just leave on SimC default. You can change them if you want to try something different, but realistically, the only change you might want to make here is, if you're a brokey, consider changing the augmentation rune settings, but other than that, don't worry about it. Finally, in the MISC options is detailed SimC report. Realistically, you're never going to look at this, but for the sim example, we're going to leave that checked. Down here, you can title your report. This is really only necessary if you're doing a ton of sims at once, like I will. I'll end up with 800 tabs, and it would be really nice to have titles for them. So I'll just label this one here, Shitty Gear, and we'll call it good. So I'm now going to hit the Quick Sim button, and this will start the sim. This one is usually lightning fast, but some of the ones we'll be doing later might take a little longer, so I'm going to edit this out. But I'll see you on the other side. Alright, and our quick sim is done, and it took less than about 15 seconds, so quick sim, very quick. Now, you can see here that in what I'm wearing, I'm simming at about 1.37 mil DPS. This is quite honestly awful. This is early tier Nerubar Palace. And today, in Undermine, if you're doing this DPS, you will be competing with the tanks if you're lucky. So, what else is here? What kind of information do we have to go off of? Well, you can see our damage breakdown is sort of something like what you might see on details. Obviously, most of our damage is coming from Pyroblast, as expected. This is pretty much just going to show you what your breakdown should look like. But sometimes it changes based on, what kind of things are going on. For example, let's say another ad spawns for even, 5 seconds, but it's not something that you actually care about. Well, that might change my abilities that hit multiple targets by quite a bit. Or maybe you have a fight where you get terrible procs. That could change it too. So, this is not a hard and fast rule, but if yours looks radically different, maybe consider that something is a little wrong. You've got your buff up times, and if you scroll all the way down here, you'll see a sample ability log. And I've got to be honest, this is kind of bait. So, this is telling you the buttons that the sim pressed to get this result. And by just looking at these, if you're not performing as well as your sim, you might think, well, I'll just press those same buttons and I'll get similar results. That's kind of true, but if your sim gets a proc when you don't, everything beyond that point is radically different. The only thing that this is realistically valuable for is things that are like ideological choices of your spec. For example, if I wanted to look if my sim combusts before or after shifting power or something like that, then maybe that's useful. But other than that, don't even worry about this. Scrolling back up to the top, we're going to look at the detailed SimC report that we asked for when we made the sim. And that's going to be right here at the full HTML report. So if you click on this, this is going to show you the actual simulationcraft program. But the information here is a lot less clear. That doesn't mean it's not useful, though. You can learn a lot about your class from looking at something like this. For example, stats like the spent time show you, what it is that you should be doing most of the time, this could be quite useful. Um, Things like the damage per execute time. This is basically how much value you're getting out of the time spent doing it. For instant cast spells, this is how much damage you're getting out of one global cooldown. Or for casted spells, this is how much damage you're getting out of the time that you spend casting your spell. And while this doesn't include the opportunity cost of certain spells, it could help you kind of understand more how valuable things like rend or other damage over time effects might be. But here you've got a ton of data that, again, for the average person, is not really a way that you're going to want to assess your sims. So I would say that if there's something you know you're looking for, this might be a good place to find it. But other than that, don't worry about this at all. We're going to head back to our sim here, and we're going to now take our character, now that we know where it's at, and we're going to think, okay, how do we make this guy better? And the place that we're going to do that is going to be in the top gear category. Now, clicking on this one might be a little overwhelming at first. Let's paste our shitty gear in here, and this is where the items we have in our bags are going to come into play. I'm just going to skip ahead of all this stuff real quick and show you the basic, user interface of this section. So here is every item in my bags, and by selecting new ones, it will basically tell me which of those options is going to be the best. So if I select all 5 of these capes, it's going to try out all 5 of these capes in combination with everything else. If you look down here, you can see the iterations of the simulation that this is going to take. Now, I have a limit of 16 million because I am an Epic member of Raidbots. If you do not pay for Raidbots, your limit will be lower. That is okay. It's going to be more difficult, but by doing your sim in batches, you can kind of get there. For example, if you sim the gear and then the gems, rather than the gear and the gems together, you can get by just fine. I would recommend, though, if you have some money to spare, then it's probably worth it if it's going to be saving you a lot of time. Or you can do what I did and kind of find some friends to go in on a Raidbots together. That can make it a lot more affordable, and you can all kind of get value out of it. So, simming basically everything is going to crank your iterations up ridiculously high. And you can see every single click is just going to start getting more and more iterations. So we'll start by basically picking out the items that are close to being the highest item level in the slot, or things that you think might be good. So looking at my helmet, I have 2 639s and a 658 that's also tier set. If I've got my brain on, I know that this is probably a good pick. We're going to want to make sure this is in the sim, but we'll keep the one we're wearing just in case. As for the necklace, we've got one that's a very rare, very powerful item, and one that's pretty shit. But this one's upgradable, so by clicking this plus sign, we can modify this item in pretty much any way. So let's give it sockets. That might cost us 10k gold, but that's no problem. And then maybe I want to use some crests, so I'll upgrade it to 645 with sockets. Maybe now this beats out the Sureki insignia. We'll find out. As for the shoulder pads, one of these is 678 and the rest are 649 or lower, so it's a pretty safe bet that this tier set shoulder is going to be the best one. I'll uncheck everything except maybe 1 or 2 others. As for the cape, it's pretty much the same thing, but it is kind of important when you have multiple items of the same item level to kind of consider what stats might be good for your class. This is something that you probably know from just looking at guides for your class. But if something has a ton of main stat, it probably could be good regardless of any sort of bad secondaries. But basically, long story short, we're just going to want to go through every slot and pick out the items that we think, off of our personal information, have probably the best chance of being good. So I'm going to skip ahead to where I've kind of narrowed this down to about 2 or 3 options in every slot. Okay, so we've skipped ahead a little bit, but we've basically narrowed it down to the items in every slot that just off of, an eyeball test, you can assume are probably decent enough. Now, beyond this, beyond the items, you obviously have the things like um, the enchantments and stuff. And these are going to increase the count of your iterations massively. So again, if you don't have Raidbots Premium, you're going to want to do these completely separately. But when it is time to do so, you can you can check the replace existing section. And while this may make your sim take 12 years, it'll kind of let you know what kind of gems should go in your gear. Again, we're going to save this though for the end. And all the way down here, you have the same simulation options that you had in Quick Sim. And we're going to keep everything exactly the same. Because again, we're just doing the exact same scenario. It's single target, 5-minute raid boss. And one more thing I did want to go over is if you have spare iterations count, and you might have some currency left over that you could maybe use. Well, in my example, I have 400 carved crests. If I wanted to use these, I could go ahead and I could pick something like something upgradable with carved, and by clicking this check mark, I could pretty much do any upgrade that I want. In this case, it knows that upgrading to 658 is free for me, so for 45 Valor Stones, I could do this, and now it'll kind of compare if an upgraded Contaminated Gauze wrist wraps might be better than my Hyperthread ones. But regardless, we'll just get into it. And once again, I'm going to skip the time on this sim, because it might be a bit, and I'm not going to make you watch that. So I'm going to hit Find Top Gear, and we'll see. Okay, we're back. And if you remember our first result from our initial sim, which was 1.37 mil, then this massive increase might be a little shocking. But that's kind of the difference that really optimizing your gear can make. And I'm sure yours won't be as extreme, but it could definitely be an increase. If we look down here, it basically will highlight any slot that there is changes in. Anything that looks exactly the same is not going to be highlighted in this manner. And you can see with our shitty set that basically literally everything needed to get changed. And if you want, you can kind of just copy this as if this is your character sheet. So by going into the game and making these changes, you will see damage much closer to this number than the initial one. And down here in the sort of chart here, you can kind of see all of the changes and how they would affect your character. So obviously here, pretty much anything we do is going to be a big change. But the way that this might appear most commonly is going to be in kind of a gem sim. So if I look here, my absolute optimal setup has a verse haste and a mastery haste gem. Well, that's nice, but maybe my second best one could have something like 2 verse gems, which you could see, oh, it might be 20 DPS lower, but I get more versatility, so I take less damage. And you can decide if that's something that you want to sacrifice, or you can just go through and you can just copy the best option. That's really what I would do if you're not too into thinking super deeply about it, is just copy the best option and kind of run with it. But how do we know that this is perfect? How do we know that this is absolutely everything we can do? Well, if you click here on these 3 dots, then you can take this anywhere. I would recommend this copy to clipboard. Basically, that's just going to copy our little block of text, but for this new profile. And what do we do with this? Well, let's go ahead and go back to Top Gear, and let's put our new best stuff in here. Obviously, we're a lot better here, but maybe we could push it a little further. So let's go to our enchants and gems, and maybe we select all of the gems that our spec maybe could use. And, we'll go look at all of the enchants. And from there, oh, sorry, I didn't check replace existing. So from there, we'll push these best item choices, and we'll see if we can squeeze out a little bit more by getting some gems that our character is going to like a little bit more. So let's try this one. And this is kind of what I meant when I said do your sims in batches. Obviously, this one's moving a lot quicker than the last one did, as it's much smaller. But even the last one really only took about a minute and a half. So even your craziest sims should go pretty quick. It only gets crazy long when you have something like, 15 million iterations of a sim with 12 bosses or something crazy like that. But for the most part, it's not going to take too long. So I'll cut to the end of this one now so you don't have to watch this. Okay, so we're back. We've simmed our gems. Well, what's the verdict? As it says here in big letters, your currently equipped gear is the top gear. It did not find any significant DPS increase by changing anything. So as you can see here, nothing is highlighted. Your top gear is the equipped set. But again, you can see kind of like, oh, well, you can lose 3k DPS by changing a couple of these, and this would give me more haste, which might feel better, but it sims a little lower. So that's kind of on me to decide, oh, do I want to take this, 0.2% loss to make my class feel a little better? Maybe I do, so that's an option you have. Beyond that, now it's time to find out some hypotheticals with our sims. What if we wanted to know how we made it better with items we don't have? Well, we have two options. The first one is take it to Droptimizer. So Droptimizer is a bit of a more future-oriented sim. This is basically how we're going to know where we go from here with our character. So let's paste our new block in here. It loads up everything. As you can see, this is our latest set we've made. It's got all of our beautiful items here, and it's very optimized for our character. So with Droptimizer, you can see here basically all of the sources of endgame gear. Realistically, the ones that you're going to be using the most would be Delves, Mythic Plus, or the Raid, Liberation of Undermine. Now, we'll start with Mythic Dungeons. Now, I'm sorry, I know it's a pain in the ass, but if you don't have Raidbots Premium, you're going to have to do this one dungeon at a time. But in the essence of saving time, I'm going to select all dungeons. And we'll assume that we're running them on a Mythic 10, just because that's realistic for me. So, you can see here, this is every item in the Mythic Plus dungeon pool for my class. And this is going to sim all of these and see what, if any, is an upgrade for me. So I'll go ahead and run the Droptimizer, and we'll see what we could get out of here. Alright, so we finished the Droptimizer, and you're going to see it's going to look a little barren, but that's mostly just because I've done most of this character's grinding already. So this is basically the summary of all of the dungeons, and you're going to have 3 valuable metrics here. This here is pretty much just a visual representation of what each item can get you. The expected value here is basically what you can assume the average increase to your character would be if you got a piece of loot. That's an upgrade, of course. And the best is going to be how much damage you'll get from getting your best item out of this dungeon. Now, in this case, the only item that is an actual upgrade for me is the necklace from Cinderbrew Meadery, which you might also be farming. So it is a 1.6k DPS increase for me. So if this were a more populated chart, for example, if we ran this when we had shitty gear, then you would see something a lot more like this. Pretty fucking crazy difference, right? Well, this is basically every item in the dungeon pool, basically. But taking a look here, you can now kind of see more realistically how it might help you decide how to spend your time. The priority here of the dungeons is basically based on what is most likely to give you a favorable increase in damage to your character. So while the Rookery has almost every item an upgrade, aside from just a few, they are kind of all very small upgrades, so it kind of lands pretty low on the priority list. Whereas, while Cinderbrew Meadery has a very similar ratio of upgrade items to non-upgrades, the ones that it has are so ridiculously big that it's, obviously the best decision for our time. It has both a main and offhand in one dungeon. So realistically, if you get loot from Cinderbrew Meadery, it's probably going to be fucking huge. Somewhere kind of in the middle would be Operation Floodgate, where realistically only half of the items are upgrades, but ones that are there can be quite big. I mean, these main slots are going to be huge increases to your character. So something like Floodgate, you might not get an upgrade very often, but when you do, when it hits, it's going to hit big. So this Droptimizer is really the best way to see sort of where my upgrades are coming from. And if I hit Run Sim again here, and then I just kind of go ahead and check the raid rather than the dungeons, let's just say, heroic raid. Because if I had that shitty gear, I'm not going to be doing mythic. But let's just take a look, at what the shitty gear could get out of the heroic raid. Alright, so looking at the heroic raid Droptimizer for the shitty gear, you can see kind of it best exemplified here. On Styx Bunk Junker, every single item is an upgrade, so the expected value is incredibly high. Whereas the best is only a 94k increase, that would be the weapon. Going to the one-armed bandit instead, the best drop, also a weapon, is a much bigger increase at 102,000, but there's an item that's not an upgrade, and some of them are really small, so the expected value is not as high. So when you're looking at, what bosses I want to pug this week, you can take a look at the priority and say, oh, well, I haven't killed Muggsy this week. Well, it's not the end of the world. I mean, he's priority 6. The expected value is incredibly low, and then you can feel a lot better about not doing that shit. So, Droptimizer, very useful tool. And as for the 4 categories on top, those 3 are really the only ones you're going to have to use. This advanced one, again, when you need this, you'll know you need it. So don't worry about that for now. Is that everything Raidbots has to offer, though? Maybe. But there is one more thing. But if I mention it, then the Shadow Council in charge of the class discords are going to come to my house and beat the shit out of me. And that is the stat weights. Let's take a look. Even Raidbots doesn't want me to use this shit. Raidbots strongly advises against using stat weights. They're an outdated tool, so you shouldn't use this, right? Yes, you can. Okay, what's this useful for? Because it is absolutely bait, but if you know that it's a bait, then you do still have things that you can get out of this. What are they? Well, let's take a look. So we're going to go back, and we're going to just grab this, and we're going to import our best simming profile into the stat weights. So what are we doing here? Everything says this sucks. Well, if you played in like fucking Legion or something, you probably remember the add-on Pawn. It was entirely based around stat weights, and it could bait you into the worst gearing decisions you could possibly imagine. So the only way that stat weights are good is if you know they're worthless. How the hell does that work? Well, I'll show you. So let's sim our stat weights, and we'll kind of understand what this system is. This will take just a second. Okay, so here's the stat weights for our best set of gear. You can see here that every stat has a value that's attributed to it. And the reason this is deceptive is because, as you can see here, if you added 2,310 haste to your character, each point would add an average of 30.1 DPS. Well, that's incredibly deceptive because what if 2,309 points of haste are completely worthless, and then 2,310 is the most valuable thing on the planet? Well, then obviously you could just get 2,000 points of haste and be doing absolutely nothing for your character. Similarly, what if 2,311 haste would be God's gift and you would just ascend, you would instantly top every single meter that you've ever seen? Well, you wouldn't get that from this. So, what is the point of this? Why am I showing you this? I promise you, it makes sense. Check this out. So, haste, verse, intellect, mastery. Well, mastery's kind of low, but that's pretty good for fire, right? Well, yeah, that's how all of my cleave works. So, what if I went to my options again? What if I went back to stat weights, and I did the same thing, but then I set it to 2 bosses? Maybe that looks a little different, yeah? Let's find out. Well, well, well. If you look at this, when I added a second target, Mastery jumped from being one of my absolute worst stats to just below Haste as one of my best stats. So do I want to start gearing Mastery? I don't fucking know. All I know is that by simming the stat weights for 1 and 2 targets, I have a better understanding of how my class is going to work. I have expanded my brain because I now understand that with the way my mastery works, its value increases with cleave. I can sort of begin to understand the way that my class works a little bit better. You know, if I start seeing versatility jumping up, I could think, why is that? Or why does mastery become more valuable in AoE? And as I think about that and my cranium expands, then I can begin to make more educated decisions on my gearing process. And when I'm looking at top gear like this and I'm thinking, oh my god, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know what pieces could be good. That's not going to happen for long, because I'm going to say, okay, well, this boss has some cleave, so I'm going to want some mastery. So something like my chast or diamond could be a lot better than this fucking ring, which is just haste verse. But then I also know, well, haste verse was really good in single target. So in single target, probably want to sim my Wix golden loop. So are stat weights good for deciding what to wear? Hell no. But are stat weights good for understanding your class on a deeper level? Absolutely. So every time someone tells you, don't fucking look at stat weights, dude, they're fucking useless. Just know, yeah, they're absolutely useless, but they're also incredibly useful for learning things. So don't be like the people who don't want to learn things and just want to know what the best gear is. Be the type of person who wants to know why things are the best gear, or wants to know how to know what their best gear is without even simming it or some crazy shit like that. So, are stat weights bad? Yeah. I still want you to use them. I still want you to know about them. But that's pretty much it. I mean, that's fucking Raidbots. You know how to sim your character. That's quick sim. You know how to find your best gear. That's top gear. You know where to go from there. That's going to be Droptimizer. So, beyond that, you fucking used Raidbots. You fucking simmed. That's it. Great fucking job. So let's go look at our fucking character, and we're in this shitty ass clown suit, and we can kind of start going and putting together our items, and everything is gonna be really good. When you show up to your next raid and you're fucking cranking, everyone's gonna say, dude, what the hell happened to you? And you can tell them, Aaron showed me how to sim. Say, who the fuck is Aaron? Say it's some dumb fuck I found on YouTube. And then go back to topping your meters. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. I've got more videos coming up soon. If you're still farming the Cinderbrew meatery necklace, I'd love to have you as a subscriber. If you've already got your Cinderbrew necklace, fuck you, and I would also love to have you as a subscriber. Thanks so much for watching my video, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.
Let's go!